Welcome to the Solid Verbal. The Solid Verbal.
Come after me! I'm a man! I'm 40!
I've heard so many players say, well, I want to be happy. You want to be happy for a day? Eat a steak.
It's that woo-woo!
And now, Dan and Ty.
Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand. Joining me, as always, over there in New York City, Dan Rubenstein. And once again, Scheme Theme rolls on here on the podcast. Dan, how are you?
Boop, boop, beep, bop, boop, beep, bop, boop, bop. I don't know why there's like an old school computer sound that I'm making, because Scheme doesn't have anything to do with that. I'm great, Ty. I'm pretty juiced for everybody to hear this show. I'm very excited.
Last week, we talked to Seth Luttrell from the North Texas Mean Green. People were really excited about that interview. Today, we've got another great one. He is the new head football coach for Mississippi State. His name is Joe Moorhead. You may know him from some of his previous stops. He's been at Penn State the last 2 years, coordinating an incredible offense that was so much fun to watch. Before that, he was at Fordham. He's had stints elsewhere like Connecticut, so on and so forth, which I know Akron. We're going to get into all that and much, much more, but we are so excited to have Coach Moorhead with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. No, excited to talk to him about the sort of, he has become known as somebody who perhaps has mastered the RPO more than any other coach and has succeeded wildly in that system for Penn State. And, Saquon Barkley is now a household name, Trace McSorley, all these, Mike Gesicki. Has turned stars into mega stars, whatever, just putting up a ton of yards, and crazy excited to see what he is able to do at Mississippi State with a different, I wouldn't say a different sort of athlete, but going to a region that perhaps is even crazier about football than Central PA, which Pennsylvania is super underrated in terms of the talent and the passion for football. But to see what he's able to do on arguably an even bigger stage in the SEC West, I think is pretty exciting as just a general college football fan.
I admire the innovation, and we could link it up as part of this show, but Bruce Feldman put together an incredible oral history of the Joe Moorhead offense that we saw at Penn State the last 2 years. And of course, it stems back to Moorhead's time with Randy Edsall at UConn and some of his other stops, but you really get a nice picture of how he cobbled this thing together. And really, you get a portal into how he was able to innovate in a sport that it's just, you wonder to yourself, how are coaches going to continue innovating? It's because Joe Moorhead thought about things a little bit differently. So whether it's the way he approaches the passing game, whether it's some of the RPOs he installs in the running game, just so many creative things that he's brought to the fore that I'm excited to have him as part of Scheme Theme.
One of the sort of huge success stories of like the basketball on grass mentality, especially with the options that a quarterback has, adding something on at the last second. It's almost like backdoor passes, reading somebody coming out to guard the 3-point line, and suddenly there's an alley-oop available that's wide open, that kind of thing. It sort of flows really nicely when you break down and watch some of these offenses over and over again. And fun fact, Ty, and I'll ask him about this in the interview, is he overlapped at UConn as first an offensive coordinator, then a quarterback's coach. The coordinators on defense while he was there, Todd Orlando and Don Brown.
Wow.
Pretty nice. Pretty good brains to pick.
Wow.
So sort of fortuitous, and that coaching staff and staffs were pretty ridiculous. And it shows with, Jordan Todman and the success that they were able to have in like 2010, 2011 in there. So just a ridiculously interesting story and a fun offense to watch throughout the years. Very exciting for us.
Scheme Theme Month is presented by our good friends over at Oliver's Apparel. Dan, surely by now you've heard of their all over short.
Wore it yesterday to the gym, and I'm a sweaty mess, Ty. And when I tell you that these shorts just dried and looked brand new after just taking the sweat, and right after I went to the gym, Ty, went and got some lunch, was not at all embarrassed. Like it worked perfectly, Ty. It just transferring from gym to lunch. I went to the bank after. I felt like $1 million.
They feel like they are of quality construction. Like
yes,
you can do a lot with them. You don't have to worry about anything going wrong. They're really well made. Go on out to oliversapparel.com. That's OLIVERS APPAREL.com. Oliver's Apparel. You can learn more, not just about the awesome shorts, but really their full line of versatile clothing. They have more that is at your disposal, whether you need something for your workout, everyday casual wear, you name it. It is great, high-quality stuff. It'll help you up your game. For our listeners and our listeners only, they are going to knock 15% off your order today if you use the code SOLID at checkout. That's oliversapparel.com. Use the special Scheme Theme Month offer code of SOLID at checkout. And you're going to save 15%, Dan. Not a bad deal.
No, not at all. This is high quality stuff. It's time to replace the garbage that you got in college. And as like a broke 23-year-old, you're listening to podcasts. You're doing you're going with on-demand audio. You're living your life in the highest possible way. You have to dress for this lifestyle, Ty. You know you have to. And you know what they say, like, why don't they make the whole plane out of the black box?
Right.
Why don't they make the whole damn wardrobe out of what these Oliver's shorts and Oliver's materials are?
It's a great unanswered question.
So comfortable, and you feel like a man, Ty. It's just a sturdy way of living.
Again, go to oliversapparel.com. Use our special Scheme Theme offer code of SOLID at checkout, and you'll save 15%.
All right, I am now joined. You already know who I'm joined with, but of course, let's welcome to the show. You know him from his time coordinating the offense at Penn State, and of course, as head coach of New York's one true team, the Fordham Rams, now Mississippi State, new Mississippi State head coach Joe Moorhead. Joe, how's life in Starkville? I assume basically the same as the Bronx.
It's going great. And hail men of Fordham and hail State. I believe that's appropriate at this time.
Fair. So when you're talking to Mississippi State, I think this is November, how familiar at that point are you with just basic things, personnel, previous scheme, and even like the potential of building your vision in Starkville?
From the initial conversations, I had very little familiarity. Obviously knew they played in the SEC West. Coach Mullen had done a very good job here building a solid foundation. And, had known about Nick Fitzgerald from just, catching games here and there, but really didn't have too much of an in-depth knowledge of the team.
So even knowing the South, for instance, obviously that's a big thing that people are going to talk about, that, you're from the Northeast, you've coached in the Midwest and the Northeast. Did you get any initial pushback about recruiting and scheme and sort of even language of football down there? Or are you confident that, that those are things that can be transcended?
No, I don't think at all with scheme and with language of scheme, a little bit from the recruiting standpoint, because there is a certain regional aspect to it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can recruit, you can recruit. If you can't, you can't. It doesn't matter where you come from. And the things that have no bounds are hard work, the ability to communicate and build interpersonal relationships, and the ability to identify prospects. So if you can do it in the North, you can do it in the South.
So now that you've seen your team, you obviously know a lot more, going into spring practice, and you've had a chance to watch tape. Do you see this as because of the success these past couple of years, as sort of a turnkey operation, as, there are pieces, but there's a lot of work to be done? Or is it, almost like a starting from scratch kind of thing?
Definitely not starting from scratch. Every day that I'm here, I become more and more confident of the opportunity that's presented to us. I think Coach Mullen did a fantastic job, like I said, building the foundation. And our job now is to elevate it from good to great. And, the term that we're using around the building now is championship standard.
Sure.
I've been very fortunate at the last four places I've been, Penn State, Fordham, UConn, and Akron, that we've won a conference championship. And, Mississippi State's had one winning season in the last 15 years in SEC play. Now we've been to 8 or 9 straight bowls, but now my job is to make sure that, we're competing for an SEC championship and have the ability to get in the national championship mix.
So in talking to coaches, you consistently learn, playbooks and systems, and I love a good food analogy. They're sort of complicated stews of ingredients you like and see along the way. So I guess walk me through your biggest ingredient influences as it stands in 2018.
Yeah, I've sometimes in clinics referred to our offense as the Chipotle offense.
Love it.
That there's not a ton of ingredients, but there's a lot of mixing and matching going on. That you have a few things that you hang your hat on, and then through different tags and RPO aspects, you can change the presentation and make it look like you're doing a lot more than you actually are. So I love a good food reference too, particularly now down here that they put 30 pounds on me. But, I think this offense was one you kind of saw the initial phases of at Akron, not so much at UConn, but then when we got to Fordham and I became the head coach and had 51% of the vote, we really was the bones or the structure of what you see now.
Who are your biggest influences? And obviously, aside from your own brain and the staffs that you worked with, when you looked outside of college football, I know there are stories talking about watching Oregon tape, even watching Eastern Illinois tape with Jimmy Garoppolo. Where do you draw? Like, what did you see along the way? You're like, I really like what they're doing. I'm going to add blank.
From a quarterback coaching perspective, I'd say Walt Harris at Pitt. Mm-hmm. From an overall coaching structure, Larry Corr was a guy that I was a graduate assistant for at Pitt. From Coach Edsel and Coach Franklin, a lot of program management and things, how to run an organization. But I'd say, we've studied a bunch of different teams, and every year, we pick something different, from one offense or another. But I think that's the beauty of our offense, and Coach Bronner, who's our quarterbacks coach, referred to it as sophisticated simplicity, mm-hmm. That what we're doing from an overall context never really changes, but we could tweak a few things here and there to continue to make us better and make it harder for defenses to combat what we do.
What was the quarterback coaching lessons you took from Walt Harris and Pitt?
No, just attention to detail, throwing on footwork, throwing on timing, the ability to read coverages pre and post snap, and I just think he's one of the best. Obviously it was a different style of offense,
mm-hmm.
more under center, more pro style, but a lot of things he taught are things we carry with us to this day.
What do you task with a quarterback? Obviously in your offense, a lot of quick decisions need to be made. So even first year installation, how does that vary from second or third year? What do you ask of your quarterback as soon as basically you start meeting with him?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we need from a quarterback is the ability, to beat the defense with his brains, his arms, and his legs. And I'm literally sitting here, going through practice scripts now, and it's amazing to me in year one in the installation of the offense, how elementary it is relative to year two, year three, or some of the things we were doing at Penn State. But like anything, it's going to be a whole installation process. We're going to give them the information that they need to know to understand, how the offense runs and the base nuances of it, and then kind of the subtleties. We'll continue to add that on through the process of spring ball, throughout fall camp, and then certainly into the season.
As a head coach, you're going to be tasked with finding guys who can absorb information, top learners, guys who can make quick decisions, but you're also looking at them play against high school defenses, and you're asking them to do things against talent and speed and size that is so unfamiliar to them. What do you look for? How do you look for, a really good quarterback brain when you just have, for a lot of the time, just tape?
Yeah, that's a great observation. And at every level, recruiting or player selection is an inexact science. And what we look for, obviously, at the quarterback position are the measurables. How tall the guy is, how much does he weigh, how does he run? From a decision-making process, I like to look at completion percentage and touchdown to interception ratio. I think that's something that's critically important. And then really, is he a winner? I mean, is he a guy that's put the team on his back and led them to great records and led them to state championships? And then really trying to get a feel from the game film and the highlights of how the guy competes and how his teammates rally around him.
Are you seeing more and more kids in high school, quarterbacks in high school, running things, obviously not exactly what you do, but having similar concepts, similar tags, stuff like that? Is it becoming more and more mainstream when you're watching these kids?
I think it's more similar than less similar. I'd say, I hate to put a number on it or a percentage, but an overwhelming majority of the quarterbacks at the high school level that we see on tape are operating out of a shotgun offense.
Sure. And when you call them tags, obviously now they're sort of more commonly known as RPOs, and adding passing concepts to running formations and running plays. Where did you sort of start doing that? When did you start doing that? Why did you start doing that?
We did a little bit of it at Akron and a little bit at UConn, but we really got, both feet in the boat and kind of made it a full-fledged deal at Fordham. And really, people kind of assume that it has something to do with throwing the ball. And in a way it does, but to me, the run pass option or adding tags is a way to neutralize defensive numbers. Because to me, the run game comes down to three things: numbers, angles, and grass. Where are the best numbers? Where are the best angles for your blockers? And how do you get your speed into open space? And I think the thing with the tags and the RPOs and post-snap reading second and third level defenders, it allows you to throw the ball if the seventh or eighth defender is able to tackle the ball carrier if you hand them off. And if he isn't, you're able to hand the ball off and you're blocking 6 for 6 or 5 for 5. So I think that's one of the reasons, Saquon, Chase Edmonds before that at Fordham, and even going back to Jordan Todman, Dennis Kennedy at Akron, that we've had running backs who've either led the league or been, in the top 2 in rushing, because we don't hand the ball off to our backs when there's people at the line of scrimmage we can't block.
What's the most difficult part of installing?
Of installing?
Yeah, of just getting everybody on the same page with tags, with, timing, with, overall understanding.
Well, for the offensive line, it's really not that big of a deal because they hear the run play and they block the run play. They could care less what the tag is. They have no idea what's going on the outside. I think probably the most, I wouldn't say difficult, but time-consuming aspect is the quarterback knowing whose pre- and post-snap reads are and allowing him, the leeway to differentiate that the guy he's reading is playing the run or playing the pass and whether he should hand it off or actually throw the ball. I think that's one that comes with a lot of repetition. But once it's installed, we keep doing the same things over and over and over again. So there's a lot of repetition that aids in that process.
Roughly what percentage of the quarterback's reads will he have installed in year one?
In year one, I'd say he's going to have, in spring one, he won't have all of them. But by the time that we hit the season through spring ball and fall camp, he'll have all of them. Now, I won't say it's to the sophistication or to the degree that, that we allowed Trace to do in year 2 at, Penn State, because the offense had grown. But, we're going to give them the necessary information for spring, see how we do with that, and then build on that in fall camp with all the quarterbacks.
Is there any particular position that you have to recruit differently on offense or numbers that are different for what you want to run than might be for different other systems or schemes or packages?
We don't recruit a fullback, so that'd probably be the one thing that's a little bit different. I mean, we use our tight end in an off-the-ball capacity, and he kind of, does some of the job that a inline tight end would do, or some of the things, because he's off the ball, he can split flow and do things like that. But from just a purely quarterback, running back, tight end, wide receiver, O-line, I don't think you're recruiting anybody differently. With Michael Gesicki and some of the things that our tight end does, you want that guy to be kind of a hybrid, tight end / big receiver, because you ask him to do both things. So I'd say that's the one position that's probably a little bit more unique than others.
You mentioned some of the RPO stuff evolved while you were at UConn, and I believe you overlapped with both Todd Orlando and Don Brown. Is that correct?
Yeah, Todd and I went to the same high school, so Todd and I were there for our first 2 years with Coach Edsel, and then I was with Donnie our last year there.
So that's a hell of a duo, a defensive duo to be on a staff with in terms of picking their brain and sort of seeing their defenses and their minds as they are, guys who are maybe not used to seeing on the other side of the field, tags and RPO stuff. How did sort of overlapping help you in developing your offense?
No, those guys are 2 of the best in the business, and Todd at Texas and Don at Michigan. They're guys that I have an immense amount of respect for, and I guess they say iron sharpens iron, and when you're going against those 2 guys every day in practice for all spring and fall camp, it certainly prepares you for the rigors of the season, because those are 2 of the best in the business.
Do you consult with them? Like, I'm thinking about doing this. Does this make sense? Could there be a defense that would be ready for X, Y, or Z?
Well, not so much with Donnie for the last 2 years since they put it on us.
I meant at UConn. Excuse me.
UConn. Oh yeah, we certainly, you step into the defensive staff room or other way around and say, hey, we're running this. How would you attempt to defend it, or vice versa? We're going to run this blitz. How would you guys try to pick it up in the 6-man protection? So those things go on in staff rooms all across the country. With guys that work well together, and
sure.
Ultimately it's about pulling a rope in the same direction.
What have you seen from, as you and your offenses have evolved and succeeded, what have you seen from, really smart defensive coordinators, smart defenses in the way that defenses have tried to evolve with you?
And that's what I love most about, coordinating an offense and calling plays is the chess match. The chess match during the week is your game plan, and then it's certainly on game day. And as offenses evolve, defenses continue to evolve. Some people start to try to play more man-to-man because that takes the air out of the zone and takes defenders out of conflict. Then offensively, you got to have your answer for that. So I think it's a great back and forth, and it's like having a vaccine to fight a virus. As offensively, we want our strain to continue to mutate and stay one step ahead of the defense as they're trying to neutralize it.
Sure. And how much in game do you see that able to happen? How much are you able to say, okay, this is what they're doing, what if we tweak this? Or is it at a certain point, the game plan is the game plan, and the plays installed for that week are what you have?
That's really what our offense is all about. And I think that the simplicity of it allows us to enter a game with a contingency plan of, we're making this call. If they play this defense, this is what we go to. So we kind of have that mapped out, during the week entering a game. Now, if a defense presents something that we haven't seen at all, or, there's a play based on a certain technique or a defensive look that's being presented, we can, go back to what we call our library and pick something maybe that we hadn't, run during the week. And that happened a bunch of times at Penn State and Fordham. But I think most of that heavy lifting is done during the week where we're running play X, and if they do something else, then, we're checking the, Y or Z.
Do you have a favorite contingency play that you've called over these past few years?
The wheel route to Saquon in the Big Ten championship game was one that, I look back on and it comes to mind immediately. That was a play that wasn't in the original game plan, and one that we kind of just called off the cuff and got him matched on, their outside linebacker or defensive end, and Trace did a good job, putting the ball where I think it was the Watt kid where he was, kind of put it right there in the back corner of the end zone. That was one that kind of sticks out.
Am I crazy for thinking the wheel route has a 100% success rate? What is it about the wheel route that makes it the most perfect thing to watch as an outside observer?
That the kid that runs 4.39 is running it, so that kind of helps.
Fair. And now, as you prepare to oversee the installation in Starkville, have you discovered a specific learning curve, or a time it really takes things to click for kids? Like with Penn State's offense almost flipping a switch, things seem to completely click. I think it was during the 2016 Minnesota game.
Yeah. It'll. I think we'll have a good gauge on it through these 15 spring opportunities. We take a week off here for spring break, then we come back on the 19th. We'll have position meetings on the 20th. We'll have position meetings and get out there and start practicing. And, our assistant coaches have had meeting time with our players per NCAA rule, throughout the past 2 months. We're able to get with them and talk a little bit of scheme. So it's good that we're able to kind of get them some of that information so they're not hearing it the first time in our first spring meeting. So I think they've digested it very well. I think there's a good understanding of this style of football. So I think we're going to hit the ground running on the 20th.
So you're called a head coach, but in reality, it seems you're sort of a head teacher. You're teaching your staff, you're teaching players, and really you're learning yourself as things evolve. How have you evolved as a teacher over the years?
Yeah, I think it was really beneficial to, in my time at Penn State, to leave the head coach's chair and get back to being an assistant. Mm-hmm. And it kind of gives you a fresh perspective of the things. And, the saying I've heard is, assistant coaches make suggestions, head coaches make decisions. So I went from decision maker to suggestion maker. Now that I'm back in the seat, and, between Coach Shoup on defense and his staff, they're going to do a great job. Coach Jones with our special teams. I've hired a bunch of guys in our offensive staff room. Coach Getzy is a coordinator. Coach Briner is a quarterbacks coach. Coach Huff, who was with me at Penn State, is a running backs coach, and guys who are familiar with our scheme that, you have to give a certain level of autonomy to all three phases in your coordinators, when you're going to spend a bunch of time, with one side of the ball. So I think I'm very excited about the staff we put together.
You tend to see that coaches who have had a lot of success on offense have very strong thoughts when running a defense, when given the opportunity to hire a defensive coordinator and to run a specific style of defense. I guess, is that true for you? And what are your strong thoughts, if they exist?
I mean, I've been familiar with Coach Shoup, since his time at, William & Mary, Vanderbilt, Penn State, and then we grew up kind of in the same general area, but Coach Shoup's a little bit older. But what I want is all three phases of the game to mirror each other from a philosophical standpoint, that we're going to attack on offense, we're going to attack on defense, and we're going to attack on special teams. In this day and age, I think you have to be multiple, whether it's 4 down, 3 down, where you're blitzing from, second, third level, mixing up the coverages. You can't just leave the picture the same because, as you mentioned earlier, the sophistication level of these offenses and the ability to make a decision based on how the defense reacts, it's created a lot of challenges for defenses. So I think what Coach Shoup is doing fantastic because, it's not just, staying static, lining up with one thing and playing one defense. There's a lot of pre and post snap movement. There's a lot of mixing of coverages and pressures, and I think that's what makes it challenging on an offense. And that's one thing that I look for, in hiring a defensive coordinator, is what he does, something that would give me problems on a weekly basis in season.
What is the thing about Coach Shoup that you think is the most problematic for offenses?
I think number one, I think he's a great teacher, and I think we have a bunch of great assistants on that side of the ball to motivate our kids and get them going. But I think that the multiplicity of it, what I would say, is the biggest thing.
Do you ever, and as you're mentioning, and we've mentioned a few defensive coordinators and offenses that have been successful around college football, do you ever come across in what must be a pretty small community, do you ever come across defensive coordinators who you've played and succeeded against who have just been like, what the hell, man? Why? Who are just like left asking for answers and just feel defeated?
I think that goes for both sides. The past, you talk about going out of the frying pan and into the fire. I mean, leaving the Big Ten East and heading into the SEC West, you're talking about some of the best defensive coordinators and best schemes in the country. So I think that's one thing where I've been very fortunate the last 2 years. You talk about, Don Brown, Coach Allen at Indiana, obviously Coach Schiano, Coach D'Antonio and his staff. I mean, that's the best of the best right there. And, I think we were fortunate to have a little bit of success and, they'll be able to hopefully carry that over into the SEC.
Is there a defensive coordinator you've coached against who you found, maybe somebody you haven't worked with, but somebody who has been particularly unpredictable in how they approach defense that you just sort of admire from afar because of how good they are at either disguising or just being creative with their defenses?
I think, Todd and Donnie Brown are two, that we've mentioned already, but, in the past, 2 years, I think, Coach Allen at Indiana and Coach Schiano at Ohio State have been two that have done a really good job with us. And it's been a great chess match. And, going back to the FCS days, I mean, there are a bunch of, obviously it's a different level when there's not as much publicity, but there's right. a lot of great coaches at that level. I mean, guys that really give you a hard time with what they do.
Do you have a name that we will know in like 3 years? Maybe he's still at the FCS level, but you sort of see him as a rising star, either on offense or defense, just as like an X's and O's mind.
X's and O's mind. I mean, the one guy, even though we had success from a statistical standpoint, the name is slipping my mind right now, but we played him 2 years in a row in the playoffs. The defensive coordinator at Sacred Heart, who was with Coach Nofree there. Okay. I mean, he just did some unique stuff that really, was problematic, and it was in a lot of ways, how it was against Indiana that it was either an explosive gain or a 5-yard loss. That there really was no in between, just because you were never really quite sure what was coming on any given snap.
Have you watched tape from SEC West coordinators? Obviously, there's a host of really good ones. Do you have any early impressions of what these defenses are going to try to do?
Yeah, I haven't really delved into it with that level of detail. Going through the games, I was really watching our personnel more. So went through all the Mississippi State offensive games and defensive games, and was really concentrating more on what our kids were doing than kind of evaluating the scheme. And, we'll be able to get to that down the road.
Sure. Fair enough. And final and most important question. So you're a Fordham grad, a former Fordham head coach. What is the single best thing to eat on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx?
I got to go with Dominic's. I think that's the call there. I mean, if you're not going pizza or hoagie or something like that, if you're talking one sit-down meal at one place on Arthur Avenue, you got to go Dominic's.
What's your order?
It's no menu, no prices, so it depends on what day you go in there. So just about anything that you pick is going to be served up pretty good.
Any other
I'm a chicken parm guy, so when all else fails, chicken parm, boom, you're done. You just go with that.
I love that. See, that's sophisticated simplicity right there.
Exactly.
It's sophisticated because you get what you get, but at a certain point, you're just like, I just want chicken parm. I like what I like.
Yeah, I mean, it's something. You go in there, something piques your interest, and you kind of want to go off the rails a little bit. You go on ahead with that, but ultimately, at the end of the day, can't go wrong with chicken parm.
And the best thing you've eaten in Starkville is
there's a place called Little Dewey Barbecue here that kind of has been the best place of a bunch of southern delicacies, but the fried catfish here has really been, wherever you get it, it's been grade A. I mean, it's been big time.
And you're ready to hit the road and start eating a ton at the houses of recruits.
Oh, let me say this to you. I mean, I'm not exactly the most svelte person in the world, but
okay.
Being an ex-quarterback and now looking like a left tackle, I mean, we got to start getting on a treadmill or do something here because this food down here has really been getting to me in a good way.
Fair enough. Joe Moorhead, head coach, Mississippi State. Thank you very much for your time and good luck this year. Very excited to check out the Bulldogs.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All righty, Dan, there you go. Joe Moorhead on the podcast. Big thanks to him. Best of luck to him in his new role down there at Mississippi State. Mm-hmm. New coaches have traditionally gotten a solid verbal bump in their first year.
That is true. That is very true. So what is your obviously completely unresearched and unprofessional at this point opinion of the hire and your questions, your confidences? I have the schedule in front of me, so you don't have to guess about any of those things.
Yeah, sure.
But what is your general sense now that he was hired in late November, so it's been, almost 4 months since it was made official? What do you think?
I think I like it in the same manner that I liked the Dan Mullen hire. And we talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but Dan Mullen was regarded as someone who was brilliant, at least offensively in terms of X's and O's. Mm-hmm. And aside of the fact that he was a big name and an up-and-coming coordinator, I think Mississippi State's mentality was that we need to look for an edge however we can get it. And if we can bring in a bright offensive mind who will stay here a while, that could presumably lift the program. And to some degree, I think he did that. I do think he succeeded there. Moorhead is a similar hire in that respect. He's an innovative guy. He's a very bright offensive mind, as you could just hear from the interview.
I would argue still a really, or at least pretty good defensive coordinator, promising defensive coordinator,
sure.
Bob Shoop, despite the uneven time in Knoxville.
Absolutely. So I think there is a lot of symmetry with this hire as the last one with Dan Mullen. My question is how he uses Nick Fitzgerald. Because you'll remember it wasn't until that Minnesota game of Moorhead's first year in State College that things really started to turn around. And I have gone back time and time again and talked about how it correlates pretty closely to how they used Trace McSorley. And he got a little bit more active with his legs, and maybe you saw some more of that RPO stuff coming into effect. Nick Fitzgerald will be the engine that runs this whole thing. He's a senior. He's an upperclassman. He's clearly the leader of that team. He got hurt this year, but Nick Fitzgerald now coming back, running a Joe Moorhead system. I expect everything to run through Fitzgerald and for Moorhead to really come up with something that suits his skill set. So my prediction, if I can make one now, they will knock off somebody just because they're going to have such a bright mind running the offense where they're going to create mismatches just based on Nick Fitzgerald alone.
Correct. There's a lot of good news about Mississippi State football and this mixing of Joe Moorhead. They should score points, which if you're going to take over in an extremely tough division, which the SEC West at least will be in the next couple of years, obviously there's some turnover at Arkansas, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, turning Matt Luke into the full-time guy and taking the interim tag off certainly is a change, but not as much of a change as the other places. But last year, they didn't lose any dumb games, which is, it speaks to the job Dan Mullen did and speaks to the job that the players did last year. But, they get demolished by Georgia and Auburn, which turns out pretty much everybody did. Those teams were great and both of playoff quality. They almost knock off Alabama, if not for some questionable decision-making near the end of that game and being not as aggressive, perhaps, as they should have been. But at home, almost knocking off the national champion and almost coming back without their starting quarterback in the Egg Bowl is enormous, and beating, and scoring more than a talented Louisville team led by Lamar Jackson is significant. Winning 9 games in Starkville is a big deal. Sustaining success like Dan Mullen did in Starkville near the end of his tenure is an enormous deal, and shows that with good coaching and with buy-in, Mississippi State will beat good teams, not just not lose to bad ones, but they will knock off and put themselves in position to beat great teams and they themselves be a really good team. So I think culturally, it will be a change for Joe Moorhead in terms of recruiting, like he said, in terms of just speaking the language and sort of understanding the rhythms of the SEC and Starkville. But beyond that, I think he's a smart dude who gets buy-in. I like the hires he made. I think they'll continue the success of evaluating 3-star types relatively locally well and sprinkling it in with some blue chips like they've done in years past. So I am bullish on sustaining that 8, 7, 9, an occasional maybe everybody's a senior and they have a transcendent quarterback like Dak situation. I don't think there's any reason to say they're going back to sometimes bowl, sometimes not.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think really needs to be mentioned here, we can underscore it again. He was a head coach previously.
True.
He was a head coach at Fordham.
In college football's most important conference.
Absolutely. So he's had a lot of those experiences that first-time head coaches need to try and learn on the job. Joe Moorhead's been there before. He's progressed very organically through the coaching ranks. Took a bit of an unconventional route to get there, and you can read his story again on the internet. It's incredible. But after he found a way to get into the college game, really made the rounds through, the Akrons, the UConns, Fordham, ended up at Penn State and now at Mississippi State. So he's a guy with a lot of good coaching experience that he brings to the table here, and I think it'll serve him very well now. Different situation. The SEC is certainly no picnic, but I'm excited to see what kind of innovation he can now bring to Starkville. Should be cool.
It's a rough middle of the season. Florida, Auburn, a bye week before they go to LSU. And then the week after, coming to Starkville, is Texas A&M, and then Louisiana Tech, not a walkover, and then they go to Tuscaloosa. So I can't see how this team does better in the regular season than they did last year with a new staff and installing new systems and a quarterback coming off of a pretty significant injury. But I think they'll be fun, Ty. I think they will be in a position to win more often, or much more often than not.
There you have it. Okay. Scheme Theme again presented by our good friends over at Oliver's Apparel. Oliver's Apparel, 15% off when you use the code SOLID at checkout. Please go check them out. They've been so supportive of what we're doing here all throughout the month of March. Thank you again to everyone who tuned in. 2 shows this week. A little bit extra on the verbal menu. Thank you so much for sticking with us. We will catch you all next week. Scheme Theme rolls on. More friends, more football. We're excited to present it again all throughout the month of March. For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein. For myself, Ty Hildebrand. Thanks again for tuning into the show. Catch you all in a week. Stay solid.
Peace.